What would you do if you found yourself alone on a highway, face to face with something that wasn't entirely human? This isn't just a story. It's a warning. It was supposed to be a quiet night. The stretch of highway ahead was empty, the kind of solitude that lulls even the most cautious driver into a sense of ease. The road stretched endlessly into the darkness, lit only by the truck's headlights slicing through the night. Nothing unusual, nothing remarkable, just the hum of the engine and the faint glow of the moon hanging low in the sky. For most, this is where a journey begins and ends, a simple drive, a destination in mind. But for one trucker, that night would redefine everything they thought they knew about the world around them. This story unfolds on one of the loneliest stretches of road in North America, the highways connecting Vancouver to San Francisco. It's a route that cuts through endless miles of wilderness, winding through dense forests and open plains, with nothing but the occasional rest stop to remind you that civilization still exists. For truckers, it's a familiar path, one where the road ahead blends into the inky blackness of the night, and the silence becomes a companion. But for one driver, the familiar became the unexplainable. Imagine being alone in your cab, the only sound the low hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of the tires against the asphalt. The night is calm, peaceful even. But what happens when the calm is interrupted by something, or someone that shouldn't be there? Figures walking where no one should be, moving with a purpose only they seem to understand. Who are they? Where are they going? And most disturbingly, why are they watching? The first time he saw her, it didn't seem like much. Just a figure at the edge of his headlights, faint and blurry against the endless black of the highway. As the truck drew closer, the outline sharpened, revealing a woman. She was walking along the shoulder of the road, her steps slow and measured, as if she had nowhere to be, but all the time in the world to get there. She wore a blue summer dress that fluttered lightly in the night breeze, and her head was tilted ever so slightly, as though lost in thought. Her face came into view next, pale and illuminated by the truck's beam. She was smiling, not a grin of joy, not a welcoming smile, but something faint and detached, like someone watching a dream unfold in their mind. The trucker slowed slightly, his instincts wrestling with curiosity. Who was she? What was she doing out here, miles away from the nearest town? The air outside was cold, and the silence was so deep that even the truck's engine seemed muffled. He thought about stopping, but something held him back. She wasn't signaling for help. She didn't seem lost or scared. She didn't even look up as the truck rumbled past her, the wind from the vehicle tugging at her dress. The trucker glanced into his side mirror as she disappeared behind him, swallowed by the darkness. A strange unease settled over him, but he chalked it up to exhaustion. People do odd things sometimes, he told himself, especially at night. Maybe she was from a nearby campsite, or just someone who preferred the isolation of the open road. But deep down, he couldn't shake the image of that vacant smile. At first, he dismissed it as a one-time thing. A strange encounter, sure, but nothing worth dwelling on. That is, until it happened again. It was a few weeks later, on the same route, not far from where he'd seen the woman. This time it was a man, tall and broad-shouldered. His silhouette loomed out of the shadows like a ghost stepping into reality. He was walking the same way, slow, deliberate, his steps perfectly in rhythm, as if following an invisible metronome. Like the woman, he didn't react to the truck's headlights. He didn't flinch at the sound of the engine or the rush of air as the massive vehicle roared past. The trucker noticed something odd about the man's posture. His head hung low, but his movements were eerily steady, almost mechanical. And then there was his face, or what the trucker could make out of it. For a brief moment, as the headlights illuminated the man, the trucker swore his lips were moving, as if he were whispering something to himself. By now, the unease had grown into something stronger. The isolation of the highway felt heavier, the cold sharper. The trucker began to notice a pattern. These figures always appeared at night, always on the shoulder of the road, and always walking as if drawn by some unseen force. He started calling them shoulder walkers, a name that felt fitting for their strange behavior. Sometimes he'd see only one on a trip, other times 2 or 3. They came in all shapes and sizes, men, women, even a child once, clutching a teddy bear in one hand as she shuffled along the edge of the road. None of them ever looked up, and none of them ever strayed from the shoulder. They just walked, always in the same direction, their expressions either blank or faintly smiling. The trucker tried to make sense of it. Were they runaways? Sleepwalkers? Something else entirely? But the more he saw them, the more questions piled up. And then one night, he made a mistake he would come to regret deeply. It was another quiet night on the road, the kind that lulls you into a rhythm. The highway was empty, the landscape swallowed by darkness, and the air felt unusually heavy. The trucker had been driving for hours when he saw her, another figure, just ahead on the shoulder. At first, she looked like all the others, a lone walker, moving with that same slow, deliberate pace. But as he got closer, something about her felt different. She was small and frail, her shoulders hunched, her movements unsteady. She wore what looked like a hospital gown, its thin material swaying in the wind. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her hair was a wild tangle of white, matted and frizzy like it hadn't been brushed in years. And then there was her face, sunken cheeks, dark hollows where her eyes should have been vibrant, and that same vacant smile. Only this time it wasn't faint. It was wide, far too wide, stretching across her face as if her muscles didn't know how to stop. For a moment he considered driving on just like he always did, but something about her tugged at his conscience. She looked old, helpless. She reminded him of his grandmother, the way she used to shuffle around in her final days. He told himself she needed help, someone to stop and check on her. His grip on the wheel tightened. His foot hovered over the pedal. And then he made the choice. Slowing the truck to a crawl, he pulled over a few meters ahead of her. His headlights cut through the darkness, but she didn't react. She just kept walking, her gaze fixed on the road ahead, that unsettling smile still plastered on her face. The trucker grabbed the flashlight from his glove box, his hand trembling slightly as he stepped out into the cold night air. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint scrape of her slippers against the gravel. "Ma'am?" he called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. She didn't respond. He took a few cautious steps towards her, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Still nothing. Just that rhythmic scraping sound as she shuffled closer. His heart began to race. There was something wrong about her, something he couldn't put into words. Her movements were too deliberate, too steady for someone her age. The sound of her steps grew louder, and then, finally, she stepped into the beam of his flashlight. Up close, she was worse than he'd imagined. Her skin wasn't just pale, it was gray, almost lifeless. Her hands hung limply at her sides, the fingers twitching slightly, as though they had a mind of their own. And her eyes, they didn't reflect the light like they should have. Instead, they seemed to absorb it, two dark voids that made his stomach turn. He froze. She was only a few feet away now, and as she shuffled closer, she raised her hands. Her fingers stretched out, reaching for him, her movements slow but deliberate. Her lips parted, revealing pale gums and teeth that looked impossibly sharp. And then she grabbed him. Her fingers clamped around his ankle like a vice, cold and unyielding. Before he could react, she yanked, pulling him off balance. He hit the ground hard, the flashlight tumbling from his hand and skittering across the road. The cold seeped into his skin as she dragged him backwards, her grip unrelenting. The sound of her slippers scraping against the pavement filled his ears, a steady rhythm that seemed to match the pounding of his heart. He kicked and struggled, his free leg flailing desperately. "Let go!" he screamed, his voice hoarse with terror. But she didn't respond. Her eyes stayed locked on his, and that horrible smile never faltered. The trucker's boots scraped against the asphalt as he fought to free himself, but her strength was inhuman. It was as if she weighed nothing, yet her pull was unstoppable. He could feel the gravel biting into his skin, the cold air slicing through his lungs. In a moment of sheer desperation, he twisted his body and kicked her square in the jaw. The impact sent a jolt up his leg, and for a brief second, he thought he'd broken something. But she didn't flinch. Her jaw didn't shatter, didn't even move. It was like kicking solid stone. And then, miraculously, she let go. The trucker scrambled backwards, his hands clawing at the pavement as he put as much distance between them as possible. She didn't follow. Instead, she straightened up, her hands falling limp at her sides. That smile remained, stretched unnaturally across her face, but she didn't move. She just stood there, staring at him with those empty eyes. He didn't wait to see what she would do next. Scrambling to his feet, he bolted for the truck. His legs felt like lead, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He threw himself into the cab, slamming the door shut and locking it in one fluid motion. His hands shook as he fumbled with the ignition, and the roar of the engine was the sweetest sound he'd ever heard. As he sped away, he glanced in the rear-view mirror. She was still there, standing on the shoulder, her face turned towards him. And then, as the distance grew, she began to walk again, her figure fading into the darkness. But her eyes never left his. He thought that leaving her behind would bring relief, that speeding away into the night would erase her haunting image from his mind. But it didn't. If anything, it made things worse. The silence in the cab felt oppressive, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional thud of his heart pounding in his chest. He kept checking his mirrors, expecting to see her there, walking after him, her pale face lit by the faint glow of his taillights. But the highway remained empty, as if nothing had ever been there. For a while he didn't know what to believe. Was she real? Was she something else? Whatever she was, she had left her mark. The next time he saw one of the walkers, a tall man with a weathered coat and hollow eyes, they did something they had never done before. They looked at him. The man didn't raise his hand, didn't make a sound, but as the truck roared past, his head turned ever so slightly, his gaze following the trucker as he disappeared down the highway. It was the same with the others. The next time, and the time after that, every single one of them turned to watch him, their faces blank, but their eyes sharp as if they recognized him, as if they were waiting for something. The trucker tried to make sense of it, talking to other drivers who'd traveled the same routes. At first, no one took him seriously. It was just a long-haul trucker's tale, a story spun to pass the time. But as he dug deeper, he began to hear things, stories, whispered in hushed tones about figures on the road. Some called them spirits, the lost souls of those who had died on the highways, unable to move on. Others believed they were something darker, something ancient, tied to the land itself. One trucker swore he'd seen a shoulder walker vanish into thin air as his rig approached, leaving nothing but a faint outline in the mist. Another claimed he'd seen the same woman 3 times in a single night, miles apart, walking as if she had never stopped. The trucker's own theory? He didn't know, and maybe he didn't want to know. But there was one thing he was certain of. He would never stop again. No matter how lost, how helpless, how human they looked, he would keep driving. Because now, every time he passes one of them, he feels their eyes on him, watching, waiting. He can't shake the feeling that his encounter with the woman wasn't the end, but the beginning of something. Something that hadn't finished yet. He told his story, not to scare others, but to warn them. The walkers are out there. They're always out there, on the shoulders of lonely highways, moving through the night with their strange, silent purpose. And if you see one, keep driving, because if you stop, you might not get away. Even now, years later, the trucker can't forget. He avoids that stretch of road whenever he can, but it doesn't seem to matter. The walkers are everywhere. Different roads, different faces, but always the same unsettling presence. And in the back of his mind, he wonders, why him? Why did the woman stop for him? Why did she grab him? And what would have happened if he hadn't fought back? He'll never have the answers, but he's learned to live with the questions. And now, when he's out on the open road, driving through the darkness, he keeps his eyes fixed firmly ahead, never looking too long at the shadows on the shoulder. Now that you've heard the story, I have to ask, what do you think the shoulder walkers really are? Are they spirits, trapped between worlds, endlessly roaming the highways? Are they something else entirely, something we don't have a name for yet? Or could they be a figment of our imagination, a trick of the mind brought on by the isolation of the open road? Think about the details, their vacant smiles, their steady pace, the way they never acknowledge the world around them. And yet they're there, aren't they? Watching, waiting. If they are spirits, what do they want? If there's something darker, why do they only appear at night, far from civilization? Could they be tied to the roads themselves? Or are they drawn to the people who travel them? I want to hear what you think. Have you ever encountered something strange on a lonely road? Maybe it was a shadow in the corner of your eye, a figure you swore you saw just for a moment, or something that sent chills down your spine. Let me know in the comments. I'll be reading them and maybe even featuring a few of your stories in an upcoming video. And while you're at it, don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you want more stories like this one. It's the strange and unexplained that keep us awake at night, and together, we'll try to uncover the truth behind these mysteries. Before you go, remember this. The next time you're driving down a quiet stretch of highway, keep an eye on the shoulder. Don't look too long, though. And whatever you do, don't stop. If this story sent shivers down your spine, let me know by hitting that like button. Share your thoughts and your own encounters in the comments. I love hearing your stories, and they just might inspire a future video. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We explore the eerie, the unexplained, and the downright terrifying. And I've got plenty more tales to share that will keep you awake at night. Next time, we'll uncover the chilling mystery of a haunted rest stop where travelers have vanished without a trace. You won't want to miss it. Until then, drive safe, stay alert, and remember, some things are better left unseen.